and so the ratings kept going up. But the show still was in danger of being canceled. ABC had given Dark Shadows, maybe a year or a year and a half, and they said, get the ratings up higher or else you'll be canceled. And so Dan Curtis was talking to his 3 young daughters, the ages of all of us kids who were watching Dark Shadows at that time. And so his daughter said, make it scarier. And so he thought to himself, well, what scares me the most? What would be scary to me? And so he came up with a vampire. He was a big fan of the Universal monster movies and the novel and film versions of The Turn of the Screw. So he added a vampire, Barnabas Collins, who was supposed to be just a monstrous villain who would terrorize the people of Collinsport, Maine for maybe 3 months, and then one of the characters probably would drive a stake through his heart, and that would be it. Right. But Canadian Shakespearean actor Jonathan Frid, who played Barnabas Collins, became a sensation with the viewers of all ages by this time, women, college students, teenagers, little kids, because he was playing the part as a reluctant, guilt-ridden vampire. He was still doing terrible things on the show, but we saw him suffering because of it. Now, that idea had been done a few times before, like in the movie Dracula's Daughter or House of Frankenstein, but Jonathan Frid as Barnabas Collins really put that idea of the reluctant vampire into the consciousness. And now you've seen that on every movie and TV show since then, Angel, The Vampire Diaries, everything. So by 1967, the ratings were going up and up, and at the end of 1967, the way Dan Curtis and the writers figured that they could perpetuate a vampire who had already done terrible things was, well, let's go back in time and show Barnabas when he was a mortal man, a living man before he became a vampire, and let's see what made him a vampire, and perhaps that would flesh out his character more and give him more sympathy, and that's what happened. And no daytime serial, soap opera, had ever gone back in time and used period costumes and things like that. But by 1968, Dark Shadows had become Dark Shadows. Almost all of the elements were in place. The show was in color by now. It had a vampire, a witch, Angelique. It had ghosts. It had time travel. Really, the only thing missing was the later major character of Quentin Collins, who was a werewolf. And so by late 68 and all through 69, a great deal of collectibles and merchandise came out about Dark Shadows. Games, puzzles, trading cards, records, Viewmaster reels, comic books, paperback novels, posters, all kinds of stuff.
And Jonathan Frid was basically experiencing Fridomania at the time, right? But he would go on the weekends when they weren't shooting, he would go and do these personal appearances, and it literally was like a Beatles concert in 1964. It was women swooning and lining up and screaming. It was pretty amazing. So when he takes this to Western Publishing, they're going, yeah, we're on board, right?
Yeah, and Gold Key had been doing adaptations of TV shows already. The Twilight Zone, Boris Karloff, Tales of Mystery, Star Trek, The Time Tunnel, The Voice at the Bottom of the Sea. So adding another dramatic TV show was not all that unusual for them.
And so the first one, the first 7 covers were photographs, right?
Yeah, the first 7 covers were photographs provided by Dan Curtis Productions.
Right. And they were, because they featured Frid on the cover, they sold very well. But eventually they ran out of photographs to use, so they started doing painted covers by a guy named George Wilson, who I happen to have written a book about. George was an interesting guy, and he basically did about 80 to 85% of the covers for all of Western Publishing and Gold Keys comics from about 1962 to almost 1980. He was a Pratt Institute graduate. He was in World War II as part of the Ghost Army. Have you heard of the Ghost Army at all? So Ghost Army was 1,000 people who recruited in different artistic disciplines to go follow D-Day and go into recently liberated Europe. And they took inflatable tanks and gun emplacements and planes, and they would put them on the ground so that when the Nazis flew over and did their aerial surveillance, they thought that they were surrounded by troops, and they were not. So George Wilson was basically a secret agent with a paintbrush in World War II, because they would also go behind enemy lines and do operations and set up fake headquarters and just completely flummox these collaborators who were left behind to kind of gather intelligence. And they made sure that, when General Patton was actually someplace else, they made sure the Nazis thought that he was right on their tails at the opposite workplace, that they could send their defenders to do it.
So it was psyops.
Huh?
It was psyops.
Yes, it was psyops, exactly right. And he was someone who took it very seriously, and it was, though there were other people in that regiment that after the war started talking about it because they never got the command not to. It was in fact classified until 1996, and he died in 1998, so he really never mentioned it until about then. But his covers for it, and for just about everything he did for Beaucaire, pretty sublime. He worked very quickly, but he had a great sense of color and design and composition, and created some amazing sort of vistas to replace those photographs that they no longer had access to. And it's a very interesting story, and if you would like to stop by my booth in the vendor's room, I have a couple of copies of the book. You can flip through and take a look and get a little more info. And now that I've hijacked it now for a commercial on my book, which I usually want to do, but it's an important story to me because I'm very proud that nobody really knew who this guy was until I put this together and everything. And his work really helped continue that thing again, like you said, 5 years almost after the show off the air, because they were popular. Though they reprinted some of the stories, they would put new covers and stuff too sometimes, did they?
No, all 35 issues were original. There were never any reprints. A number of writers wrote the stories. Donald J. Arneson wrote quite a few, as well as this one-shot story digest magazine, which was a prose novel with illustrations by Joe Certa, who drew the interiors of the Dark Shadows comic book. 6 issues were written by Arnold Drake, who, along with artists, created Dead Man and the Doom Patrol, and wrote Challengers of the Unknown and Batman, as well as funny comics like Little Lulu and Heckle and Jekyll. Then another guy, was it John David Warner, who was writing for Captain America and Son of Satan around the time that he wrote a few Dark Shadow stories. So, except for a little bit of exposition in issue number 1, the comic books did not really follow the storylines of the TV show. Neither did Dan Ross's paperback novels, because the story went by so fast. If you wrote something, that would be 3 months old, and the story would be somewhere else. So these comic books went off on their own, and editor Wallace I. Green said in an interview in 1986 that we saw Barnabas as a romantic hero, which he was in those paperback novels too. Although, because it was a comic book and we needed action, he did sometimes take on super heroic traits, and had action-packed stories of heroism, still with the vampire curse, which did not appear in about a half dozen early issues. For some reason, the writers decided, well, he's not a vampire anymore, and that because several times on the TV show, Barnabas was not a vampire. He was cured, but then became a vampire again. But for almost all of the 35 issues, he was a vampire in the comic books. we often saw his fangs as Joe Certa drew them, but he rarely actually bit people in the comic book. He did in issue number 1 and a few times, but that was more implied. But the vampire curse was definitely a big part of the comic books, and in one third of the issues, Barnabas traveled through time, a staple of the TV show. And then as later, when David Selby as Quentin Collins joined the TV show, Joe Certa began drawing his character, and Quentin was a werewolf in the comic books. So there were 7 TV characters that were used in the comics, and that Arnold Drake called them the house cast. And he said that he liked to get outside of the house cast whenever he could and write stories that dealt with other subjects, like this story, The Weekend Witch Hunters, about a tour bus that takes people up to Collinsport, Maine, which is a hot spot for the supernatural. And so they go on a ghost tour or a witch tour and encounter a real vampire and werewolf. So Arnold Drake, would throw in some comical things or current events type things, such as Barnabas's blood turns a billionaire into a vampire who then goes down to a Caribbean nation and overthrows it and blackmails Barnabas into becoming his lieutenant. So this one was an interesting one. But Arnold Drake said in the interview that he didn't try to follow continuity of something that had happened on the TV show or even in the comic books, because he said he wanted to be free to write a story that did not have to be restricted by what had happened on the show or in previous comics.
Which makes sense, because none of the other comics that they were doing that were not superhero, and even those didn't do much kind of maintaining the continuity. It was all episodic, which is the way television was done back then as well, except for soap operas.
Right.
And they knew that they couldn't make this into a soap opera because they could only get out 35 issues in 9 years is not a lot of issues to get out in 9 years. So.
Yeah, it began as quarterly, and then for number 13 switched to bi-monthly, but then near the end it went back to quarterly.
Right, and at the towards the end of the series, they also did a daily newspaper strip.
Oh yes, from March of 1971 to March of 72, there was a Dark Shadows newspaper comic strip. It ran in Philadelphia and Memphis and I think Denver, but not in Nashville where I lived. But later I collected the strip and it came out in book form and whatnot. Hermes Press put out these books that reprinted all of the Dark Shadows comic books in color. I wrote the introductions to the books, and then did a book reprinting the newspaper comic strip, which was unusual because it began about 3 weeks before the show ended. So it ran for another year, just as Dan Ross's paperback novels ran for about 4 or 5 years after the show. So there was still a Dark Shadows presence in the early 70s, especially with the rise of fanzines, such as The World of Dark Shadows, and that's where I started writing articles about the Dark Shadows comic books from Gold Key, and ever since then I've continued to read them and study them and find interviews and information and build on my research.
And the teen magazine, 16 and Teen Beat, they were still putting Jonathan and David on the covers and for years after that. But the characters and the situations were so popular with fans, and ABC was just kind of had to have enough, huh? You think now?
Yes, a lot of factors contributed to the cancellation of the show. The ratings had gone down from a record 20 million in the summer of 1969, which was fantastic. Today you have to have a football or basketball game or NCIS or something to get 20 million. But even when the show was canceled, it had 12 million, which was quite respectable. But,
We get canceled now for 12 months.
Oh, no.
No, absolutely.
but some of the actors were getting restless, and Dan Curtis himself became disenchanted, his words, with the show at the end, and wanted to move on to movies, and he did. And last night in the movie room, we watched The Night Stalker, which he produced as soon as he moved his family from New York to Los Angeles. But another reason was demographics. 20 million people were watching, but so many of them were little kids and teenagers, people who were not going out and buying the detergent and shampoo and hairspray that was being advertised
Right, they were
on the
like
show.
the comic books and the
Yeah.
years and the Dan Ross novels and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
The merchandise release for the show. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was not the audience they were hoping to get.
Mhm.
Yeah. When I was putting together this article, you and I talked about Elliot Kaplan and Ken Ball, who produced the Daily Strip for a while, and I found it very interesting that there was never a writer's name attached to it. And
Newspaper strip.
to the newspaper.
Or the comic book, for that matter.
Correct, right. But that Ken Ball, to avoid conflict because he was doing another script for the same syndicator, signed it as Ken Bruce. And Elliot Kaplan, who I'm sure was the writer.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy said, no, I can't remember the name. I don't know who it was. I don't know. He did the same thing. He just decided not to sign it. And he just signed back of the check that they were giving.
Yeah. Elliot Kaplan was the brother of Al Cap, of Little Abner.
So, yeah, kind of in the comic strip business, family business and stuff. So that leads us then to a fallow period, as they would say in a Shakespeare novel. He never wrote novels, but I think there was such a thing. And in 92, Innovation Comics comes along.
Yeah. Yeah, Innovation, in the short time it was in existence, became the number 4 comic book publisher after DC, Marvel, and Dark Horse. But, business decisions and interior struggles led to an abrupt going out of business of Innovation. But just after the 1991 Nighttime Dark Shadows on NBC, which was a wonderful show, but lasted only 13 hours, 12 episodes, Innovation did this terrific comic book series and captured the likenesses of the actors perfectly. That is something that Joe Certa did not do in the Gold Key comics. He drew them so that we could instantly recognize who was Barnabas, who was Julia, but he didn't try to, get the faces exactly right. He just drew them as he interpreted them. But these artists took great pains in capturing the likenesses of the actors, Ben Cross, Barbara Steele, Joanna Going, and others. And can't think of the names of the artists at the moment.
Let's see, I've got it here. Something painted by E. Silas Smith.
Yeah, the covers were E. Silas Smith.
Exactly. And then Jose Pimentel took on the
Right.
next series, and his was not nearly as good.
Mhm.
But the problem, the reason that the 91 TV series only lasted 13 episodes is because the Gulf War kept preempting them.
Mhm.
And no one could keep track of where they were going to be airing in the slots that they were kind of allotted to on Sunday afternoon or whatever by the network. So it just, it was in fact a very good series, and I enjoyed it very much, but nobody could keep track of it, and so they didn't get a renewal, which is sad.
Mhm.
And the same thing, like you said, kind of happened with the comic books. It's, after that first series, it just, Innovation was in kind of a downward spiral because the managing partner was unhappy with the money partner who was telling him, no, we need to do nothing but these, and I'm cutting your budget to do it. And he was like, no, we need to also bring in intellectual properties we own rather than just licensed properties. And so they had a big falling out. It all, as things do went to hell, and they went out of business eventually. But they did. I mean, the paintings, and I've got one of the posters for the number one they put out, and those
Yeah.
posters are gorgeous. I had it on my wall for years.
Oh, yeah, the art was terrific.
Right.
Yeah, there was a total of 9 issues, printed, I believe.
And again, kind of another fallow period until Moonstone came along, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, now this is a very unusual moment in Dark Shadows comic book history. This is a one and only comic book in which Barnabas Collins meets Carl Kolchak, whom we saw in the movie last night in the movie room. This came out in 2009, but it had been in the works for a few years. Dan Curtis died in '06, but before he died, he gave his special permission to do a one-time comic book in which Barnabas and Carl Kolchak meet. And this is what came of it. And the story is, in which they meet is written by Mark DeWitziak, who is an expert on Kolchak, the Night Stalker, Dark Shadows, Columbo, Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe, everything. So
He wrote the Kolchak Companion, Night Stalker Companion, which is actually just about to come out.
yes, it's coming out in a
That's
new
very exciting.
expanded version, so I can't wait to see that. This is quite unusual from Moonstone Comics. Now, Moonstone did bring out many prose novels about Carl Kolchak, and I think maybe other comics featuring him, but this was the only time that he and Barnabas met in comic books. So this is a curio that happened just one time.
Now, I will say that, after that, then Dynamite Comics got the license hit, and I have only read one of their series, and I was not very impressed.
Well,
I love the cover, but Franco Francavilla, he does great stuff. He's an local Atlanta fellow.
Yeah.
I mean, not original, he's from Spain, but he was.
Well, like movies changed over the years and TV shows, comic books did too, and the style was so different.
Yeah.
The way comic books look now is not the comic books, the Silver Age comic books that I read, The Brave and the Bold, and Lois Lane, and Justice League, and Master of Kung Fu. The look and style and approach had changed the way it was written and drawn. But the stories were interesting, especially when they did something called Dark Shadows Year One, which went back to the 1795 story and fleshed it out, gave us insight into what else was happening that we didn't see on television, and then took a few liberties, and embellished on the plot and the story. So Dark Shadows Year One was interesting. And then the most unlikely team up in the world was Barnabas Collins and Vampirella. And yet it worked. You would think that would be silly or in poor taste or just not workable. But this 4-issue series was interesting. Quentin Collins was in it, and what is the name of Vampirella's friend who, is she a witch or a werewolf or something? She was in it too. Pantha, yes. Yeah, she was in it. So it was quite unusual, but the writers and artists pulled it off. And
We have the living vampire, and we have a
Yeah.
undead vampire, so.
Exactly.
right.
So in addition to reprinting all of the old key comics and the newspaper strips and also the digest, the mystery digest thing, Hermes Press also put out Curse of Dark Shadows, which is an original graphic novel that came out last year. And I was just at San Diego Comic-Con 2 weeks ago, and they announced that there's a new one as well. That was kind of a follow-up to that.
Yeah, and 1 week ago was the Dark Shadows Festival in Los Angeles, and at the last minute I was not able to go. My plans changed and I'm so disappointed, but I was going to moderate a panel with this comic book creator and and a couple of other writers. It was going to be a writing panel showing how Dark Shadows has inspired all of us to write books or comic books or scripts and things about the show.
By the way, if you don't own that book, Jeff's book, Television Horrors of Dan Curtis, you should block whose table get it. It is fantastic. And one of three that he's written about what Dan Curtis did for television, which was kind of an enormous feat. He really changed the face of horror on television in many ways.
Oh,
in
yes.
many instances.
The Night Strangler, the Norlist tapes, Trilogy of Terror, Scream of the Wolf, Curse of the Black Widow. And then later did The Winds of War and War and Remembrance, and a Western and a love story. So he did everything. But we remember Curtis for his horror productions and his theatrical movie Burnt Offerings. But yes, so the writer is Craig Hurd McKinney, and this brings the Dark Shadows characters up to the present time. You know, the little boy is grown, and the young daughter, the young adult daughter, is now the head of the family. And Barnabas comes back in an unexpected way. So I think I heard that Craig Hurd McKinney has plans to make either 3 or 5 comic books. You know, if he gets the chance to do his entire story. I hope he does. And so this is the first one, Curse of Dark Shadows, from Hermes Press. And then I think the second one is going to be called Fall of Dark Shadows. And so look at hermespress.com and you can find all of these books reprinting the comic books and information about this new one.
So in a non-comics book related arena, they also just announced an animated television series of Dark Shadows, which I find very intriguing. It's going to be like an adult series for adults. Right?
Yes, Warner Brothers is working on a Dark Shadows animated series, and it won't be a kid show. It'll be something serious like Batman the Animated Series or the current Batman Caped Crusader that's on right now, or maybe Adult Swim, but not perhaps as extreme as some of that. But it'll be essentially like what the TV show was, a show for adults that teenagers and kids will also like. So there was talk about it at the Dark Shadows Festival last week. A guy was there to talk a little bit, and one of Dan Curtis's daughters, Kathy Curtis, one of his daughters died young, but his 2 daughters now both work in movies and television, and had a hand in the 2012 movie. And but his daughter, Kathy Curtis, said that she is involved somewhat in the animated series, but that they have a long way to go still. It may be, 2 or 3 years before we see anything, but they have been working on it since last summer.
Yeah.
So
they released some art, and it looked pretty good, actually. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it.
I mean,
How were the characters drawn?
It was just Barnabas. I mean, it was just like a piece of key art to kind of like when they announced the series. You gotta have a graphic for the announcement. It looked fine.
But it was a serious.
Yes, it was. I mean, it was not terribly dissimilar to some of the Gold Key stuff. It was slightly exaggerated as animation tends to do. But I mean, the beauty of that is, it's like, animated characters never age. So you can have all those original characters look like those original actors if you want to put that towards it and have the rights to the likenesses, which I'm pretty sure they do, and continue to tell stories in that original universe.
If that's the quality that we can expect, I don't think any Dark Shadows fans are going to be disappointed.
That's great. That's good to know.
Right.
I mean, adult animated series have been a thing like in Japan and overseas for years and years, but it's just something that started catching on in the last 5 or 10 years here, and I'm glad that, that it makes perfect sense to me as a storytelling vehicle. It's a great medium to be in, because like you said, you don't have to worry about budget for. It takes just as much time to draw a space battleship remote as it does to draw a bunny rabbit. So, there's no real budget difference to I don't know, bringing animators and whoever they wind up doing it with. But, it's exciting to me. And hopefully it will spawn, like other stories in comic form as well. And it seems like that would be a kind of a no-brainer to do a comic series, since it's already, you've got all the model sheets from the animated series to use, and it's a great medium too.
Yeah, I hope that there will be more Dark Shadows comic books and maybe novelizations and whatnot. Dan Curtis, when he was alive, tried several ways to get another Dark Shadows series off the ground, and finally, this was in the years after the '91 show, around the year 2000, he thought about making a Dark Shadows Broadway musical with music by Rupert Holmes, who wrote the Pina Colada song.
Well, now let's be careful here. He also wrote the Mystery of Evan
Yes,
which
right.
was a fantastic musical. If you've never seen it, you should. So Rupert Holmes, yes, the Pina Colada song is ridiculous and it's hard to get out of your head. But the Evan Drew thing was really a very good example of that kind of mid-'80s nostalgic sort of musical.
Right. So he was
I think it would have been a
serious.
fantastic thing. I'm a musical theater fan, and I think any kind of genre can be adapted to that, and it lends itself. And also, that was not terribly long after the Dracula play was such a big hit with Frank Langella, and then a succession of great actors that played the role.
Yeah.
But yeah. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
I've got a question. Demographically, who were the Golden Key comics for? The younger fans, the older fans? And then secondarily, which of the company's runs would you recommend to like modern readers first getting into Dark Shadows now?
Well, Gold Key stuff, Western Publishing stuff, was basically written for young readers. But they also understood who the audience for the TV series was. And like he said, they didn't want to get like mired up in the canon of the television series, because my God, the canon of that television series is undecidable, right? Like they didn't even bother. It's just like, okay, well, let's go back in time and erase that and do something else or whatever. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, they were on spinner racks and 7-Elevens and drugstores and stuff like that. And the people who populated that looking for comic books, right, me essentially
At that time.
So I would imagine there was the occasional housewife or whatever that might be like, I'm seeing a Dark Shadow a little bit, or what is that? Like saw her over and looked at it and go, oh, that's her kids. I just don't think it was something that big. But of course, obviously, comics had aged out of being for kids long ago. It was no longer for kids by about 1978, frankly. And then certainly the revolution in independent comics and independent comic stores and retailing in the 80s kind of put the knife to the throat of that.
Well, I would, just for sentimental reasons, and because there are 35 of them, I would recommend the Gold Key comic books. Now, like in any comic book series or any TV show, you're going to run across a dud every once in a while. And a few of the stories are not the greatest, but many of them are, and probably you ought to be able to read this particular book and find the 12 greatest stories. 10 of them were chosen by me years ago in articles, and then Hermes Press followed my lead, and then Hermes Press added 2 more, which are very good too. So these are the 12 best. Some of the ones I mentioned recently, issue number 1, and some that really capture the tone and mood of the TV show better than others. Dark Shadows number 8 does that. And so all of that is there in that particular book.
And it's a considerable savings over buying the hardcovers of the entire run. What's the price on that, the retail price on that one?
$49.99.
Okay, so each volume, and there are how many? 30 or 5?
There are
Of the hardcovers.
there are 7 volumes.
7?
No. Are there 5 or
I think it's
7?
5. I think
Yeah, 5.
there are 6 volumes.
There were 35 issues, so I think 5 times 7. So there were 5.
Generally speaking, that there's also other matter put in there, so it may be 6. And we apologize for not being experts enough to look at that before we came. However,
Or don't remember it.
don't just remember it. But that is a great way to spend for the cost of one book, and it's probably not terribly difficult to find a discount somewhere, as well on Amazon.
And I didn't bring it with me, but Dynamite later came out with a trade paperback about that thick of all of Dark Shadows Year One and some other compilations. So to get the gist of that, you could get some of those compilations.
And then, like that compilation of Year One was like $5.95 on HamiltonBooks.com. I got it there.
Yeah, and even the Vampirella issues came out in one trade paperback too. So yeah, that would be a way to go. I think the way to go for many comic books. You know, there's so many of those omnibus editions and best of and greatest. So that's the way to go to get the cream of the crop.
I want to ask you, was the creative team consistent in the comic book all the way through from beginning to end? The same artist, Arnold Drake as a writer, or were there any changes?
The artist was the same Joe Certa, who illustrated Robot Man and the Martian Manhunter and other characters before Dark Shadows. He drew all 35 issues, but there were quite a few different writers. Don Arneson, Arnold Drake wrote 6, John David Warner, Jerry Boudreau, several different writers. And so, no, there were some mix-ups, such as in how many of the characters knew Barnabas was a vampire or didn't, or can Quentin talk when he's in werewolf form or not. You know, sometimes he would and sometimes he wouldn't. But there is a notorious issue, number 28, in which the Joan Bennett and Louis Edmonds characters, Elizabeth and Roger, are written as husband and wife.
Instead of brother and sister.
They were brother and
So
sister.
there's a little bit of a gap there, yeah.
So I don't know how the editors must have been asleep at the switch on that one, because that did not match any of the comic books. My only guess is that maybe this writer saw some 1795 episodes of Dark Shadows in which Joan Bennett and Louis Edmonds did play Naomi and Joshua, who were married. That was the only time those characters, those actors were married on the show, and went with that, but I don't know what happened. So there were a few goofs and low points in the series, but overall, a tone did go through all 35 issues, and near the end of the series, there was even a little bit of continuity, because Barnabas and Roger Collins were thrown back to Iceland in the year 750, and met their ancestors, whose name was not Collins but Colnison. And then later in 2 other issues, that storyline was addressed and capitalized on the next issue, and then 1, 2 after that. So,
did we ever figure out why George Wilson was no longer doing covers when Joe Certa did those covers?
I don't know, because after number 30, Joe Certa started drawing the covers, except for one more that George Wilson did. So I don't know. I guess George Wilson was busy, or maybe was he sort of trying to leave Gopi at that time?
He wasn't actually, but he, in addition to, so he would do sometimes as many as 12 or 13 covers for them a month. Think about that. These are finished paintings, and he would do 12 or 13, most often 6 to 7, but for Gold Key. And then in addition to that, he would be doing pulp covers and pulp interior illustrations, and he did illustrations for Hardy Boys books and all of these other things. He just was a non-stop machine. And what I'm guessing is that he probably had a client that demanded more of his time for a certain thing.
Right.
And then, they're like, well, Joe's the only other guy who can draw this character or whatever. So.
In a 1986 interview with the editor, Wally Green, he said George Wilson did a huge amount of work for us, and how we kept him as long as we did, I'll never know, for what we were paying him. And Green said that Wilson later went into book covers and advertising
I wish I had some comic book covers, but I haven't been lucky enough to find them in my price range. So
Yeah, I would love to have some of those covers too. I do have two original art pieces from the newspaper comic strip, one of the Sunday strips and then one of the dailies. So that's hanging in my Dark Shadows room. My guest room is where I keep all of my Dark Shadows collectibles, the books, all the memorabilia and pictures on the wall and autographs and all of that. So
Your personal actor museum.
yeah.
yeah, good.
So what was the, if you know, the original series, what was the print run? How difficult are that collector issue of team? And what was sort of the high watermark of price of values that you're?
Oh, well, the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide says that issue number 1 with the pull-out poster intact is worth about $575. And even the cheapest subsequent issues are worth $50 each. But I don't know about the print run. Probably in those first issues, I imagine it was lower.
I would
Because,
imagine it's not actually.
Oh, really?
By that time, the show was already a big hit, and even though Western Publishing Gold Key was sort of lesser remembered and lesser regarded than DC or Marvel at the time, they were printing an awful lot more copies of their issues because they were in more places. So, and they also did for a period where they would print them for trade and then for just like general retail, and they would put Whitman on them, and that would be Gold Key for the general retail stuff. And they would either collect those into like 3 comics for 25 cents or whatever.
Here's a Whitman.
Exactly right, yeah. So they would literally, some of their more popular books were in print runs of over $1 million. And I would imagine that some of those are that way. The reason that first issue is that expensive is only with that poster. If it's like in great condition and has that poster and has never been removed and put back or anything like that, then it's worth like $575. But I think $50 on the later issues is outrageous because I find them often not in dollar bins anymore, which I used to, but I find them in $5 to $10 bins in comic shows and stuff. And they're not like, slab graded copies on them. So what they're giving you is the price for a slab graded copy, right?
Number 2 did not have a pull-out poster, but number 3 did. So 1 and 3 are the most valuable.
Right.
And I just looked it up. The book went back from bi-monthly to quarterly with the last 2 issues. So probably those might be a lesser number.
I would imagine they are.
What was
They
what
probably
was-
Often in the last few issues.
So I can cry. What was the cover price like on Marvel? Was it listed on those comics?
Yes, these 2 with a poster in them were 25 cents, but the others were 15 cents. And then I guess it went up to 20.
Yeah, and I think then it was 25 for some of the stuff that they were.
Yeah.
The other thing is,
then it was
too,
20.
is that Western would do these overruns, and put them in those 3-packs. They had slabs and slabs and slabs, like enormous amounts of pallets of overrun comics well into the 80s of these titles and other titles that were printed 6-7 years before. And they would just put them in and make them value packs. So it's really hard to say what the actual print run might have been and how they dribbled and gravelled out of the warehouses later on.
Now, a very strange offshoot is this little booklet that reprints a heavily cut version of one of the Dark Shadows comic books. They leave out panels and move the story along quickly. But it was part of 9 different booklets of the other Gold Key titles that were popular at the time: Twilight Zone, Boris Karloff, Star Trek, Turok, Son of Stone, and wasn't it Dagar the Invincible?
Dagar the Invincible,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and for some reason, they are called Dan Curtis giveaways. Dan Curtis had nothing to do with this other than Dark Shadows, but I think maybe the Overstreet Price Guide named them that or something. But that's the name of the set of Dan Curtis giveaways. And there are 2 Star Trek booklets in the set and just 1 Dark Shadow. So
Should have been Gene Roddenberry giveaway.
yeah, right. Yeah, so I'm sure all the Star Trek fans who are meeting in the next room would want these as well.
Yeah. And those were, as you said, giveaways, so they're free. And honestly, I think that those are probably scarcer than the comic, than a lot of the issues of comic books. Yeah, you know. So, let's see, we got about another 8 minutes or so. Any other questions? Anybody got any sort of insight or, yeah?
This is for you, Anthony.
Yeah.
George Wilson, he probably did, but I want to ask you, did he do the covers on, the spectacular covers on Tour of Son of Stone?
He did many of them. He was not the only person. But like I said, from about 1962 to almost 1980, he was predominantly their cover artist. There were other people on some of the house owned. I say the house owned. They didn't really own them because they did give royalties to the creators. But things like Dr. Spector, the Occult Files of Dr. Spector, who was created by Don Bluth. Jesse Santos did some of the covers for that. The George Wilson did a bunch of them as well. They got the Invincible, the same thing. So predominantly, yeah, they're mostly by George, but Vic Prezio, who was also in the Ghost Army with him and also a crack with him, did a lot of covers for Gold Key, as well as several famous Monsters covers and
Creepy,
Creepy, and yeah, exactly right.
Creepy.
So, yeah.
Eerie.
And I hope to at some point, people ask me, it's like, are you going to do a Vic Prezio book? It's like, well, I kind of for a moment thought maybe Vic and George were the same guy because they had so many common points, you know. It's like, it's just like a pseudonym, but they're not. They're 2 different guys. But I hope to at some point maybe turn back and do like an Arts of Gold Key book and just do bios of everybody in there and examples and stuff like that. But I would probably find a different publisher for it. The problem with the book that I done in George Wilson is it was being released right at the time that Diamond Comics was imploding, and Hermes Press was one of the companies that got caught with a bunch of stock in the warehouse that they had just only 2 days ago gotten access to. This is 3 years later. I would try and stay out of like comics trade publishing for a while, just because I got burned really hard like that. But yeah, so.
I read your book about George Wilson, of course, and weren't there about 3 or 4 cartoonists who were in the Ghost Army?
Yeah, and other guys like Bill Glass.
Oh, yeah.
Was in the Ghost Army. He was one of the,
Yeah.
big guys, and other visual artists, photographers, painters, things like that. They really were secret agents who wielded paintbrushes and pens as swords in the name of freedom and anti-fascism, and they saved the world. It's amazing to me that there's not a movie, and anyone who would like to option my book, please.
That would be a great movie like Monuments Men.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly the model for that. Yeah, it would be Monuments Men, which was not an enormous financial success, but it's a fantastic movie, and it's a great story. And it's also, yeah, me too. And it's also based on, real life art heroes and during World War II. So I would love to see something like that happen for those guys. They were all, by the way, everybody in the Ghost Army, which was the 23rd Special Headquarters, and was 4 different platoons and brigades and stuff, were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in March of 2024. There were only 9 that were left alive out of these 1,000 people who were in the division. So, and now there's only 3 left, which is kind of sad. But it's an amazing thing that they did. They estimate that through their efforts, they saved as many as 20,000 to 50,000 Allied and American lives. So I'm so glad that they finally got recognized. There's a great book about the Ghost Army and a documentary that PBS ran. So if you have any interest, check those out. Rick Beyer was the guy who did them, who was a Peabody Award-winning journalist, and he wrote a lovely afterward about them for my book that Hermes Press neglected to put in the book. So it's shared on my website, and you guys can go to goanthonytaylor.com and read that.
Was it just a mistake, an oversight, or did they cut it out for length or something?
I believe the excuse was, we can't really put our next to that.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, you can stick a picture next to any page of a book.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. What can you do? So, I guess we are, one more.
I want to thank Mr. Thompson for his Dan Curtis TV book. I have it. And,
Great, thank
I've
you.
always,
All three of his books are just fantastic.
and I've always loved his productions, and his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was my
That was a
favorite.
great one with Jack Palance.
Yeah.
And Jack Palance also played Dracula
Yeah.
for Curtis, and written by Richard Matheson, whom we are celebrating this weekend.
It's all connected, though.
Oh,
It's all
it is.
connected.
Yeah.
One of the- other than at his table, which is down, in the pre-function hallway just before the vendor's room, where he's got these books and stuff. Tell everybody where they can find you online, or where they can find your other stuff.
Oh, I don't have a website, but I'm on Facebook. My three books, The Television Horrors of Dan Curtis, and House of Dan Curtis, and Nights of Dan Curtis, are available on Amazon, and this one from McFarlandBooks.com. And while I'm mentioning things, if you don't know about Wonder Magazine, this is a fantastic magazine, and this issue, number 18, has a long interview with me, beautifully illustrated, all about Dan Curtis's productions. I mean, it just goes on forever, and it shows some of my collections, by the way. Wonder 18, and then Wonder 19 has a much shorter interview with me about one of Curtis's movies, the very scary movie, The Norless Tapes, written by William F. Nolan, who co-created Logan's Run. And then this book has an article written by a husband and wife about the locations that were used in the Norless Tapes. I can't find right at the moment, but yeah, the filming locations in and around Northern California where Curtis filmed the Norless Tapes, and the writers went back and took pictures the way it looks now and pictures then. Roy Finnis of The Invaders was the star of the Norless Tapes, and he's still alive, and he was at the Dark Shadows Festival last week. And you would love to bring him to.
I would love to, but unfortunately, I reached out through a friend there, and as it turns out, he's in assisted living, he's in his early 90s, and I just don't think travel is a great idea for him.
Yes, well,
But-
work out a video interview or even a live Zoom and bring him that
I
way.
would love to, and see if we can do that, so. My books are down at my booth in the vendor's room, or my website is online at goanthonytaylor.com. You can pretty much keep up with everything that I do there. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Threads, this issue of Cryptology is, I think they put out one since then, right, maybe two?
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's available from Tomorrow's Publishing, and I think they are tomorrows.com, and it's got lovely color illustrations inside, outside, and I hope you guys are enjoying the convention here. I edited a companion book for the Matheson Centennial event that we're doing here that's going to be out in September from Head Press, and you can find them at headpress.com. So have a look at that. There are posters all around with info on it and stuff, and we've got some amazing writers that are doing that, and several of them were here. So, also, yes, Dr. Thompson wrote something. Steve Sutton this year, who wrote 2 chapters for it because he just couldn't get enough. And Matthew Bradley are all in the book, as well as I am. So thanks, guys, for coming to the Thomas to Dark Shadows panel. Enjoy the weekend and come say hi at our table.